At LifeLink 3, our mission is to provide safe and effective air medical transport. Helipad operations present a unique set of hazards, some that are obvious and some that are not so obvious. This requires a consistent, layered approach to safety. This video outlines important guidelines for maintaining your helipad, pre-arrival preparations, final approach and landing precautions, and proper patient unloading and loading techniques to ensure the well-being of patients, hospital staff, and flight crews. You might say a safe and effective patient transport actually begins where it ends, at the hospital helipad. The maintenance and operation of each helipad is the responsibility of the individual hospital and its staff. Obviously, the approach and departure path for the helicopter must always be clear of obstructions, either temporary obstructions, like cones or rocks on the landing pad, or more permanent obstructions, such as new buildings, communication towers, or cranes. Report any obstruction that you can't personally clear to the responsible department at your hospital and the LifeLink 3 Communication Center. The windsock is an important aid to the pilot. Make sure that it's easily visible and free to move so that the pilot knows which way the wind is blowing during a landing or takeoff. Check regularly to make sure the windsock isn't torn or faded and that it's well lit when it's dark outside. Please contact LifeLink 3 for a windsock if your helipad needs a replacement. It's also important that your helipad has clearly painted landing marks to help guide the pilot to a safe touchdown. Of course, patient transports occur at any time of day or night. Therefore, each helipad requires perimeter and flood lighting to maximize visibility. That lighting should always be pointed toward the ground and away from the pilot's line of sight, so that it doesn't inadvertently obstruct his or her vision. Lighting and landing marks are required for all aircraft operations and must meet FAA requirements. If you have questions about those requirements, please contact the LifeLink 3 Communication Center. Also contact the Communication Center if you have a helipad closure, restrictions, or conditions that would impact the safe and effective operation of your hospital's helipad. The success of any air medical transportation begins well before an aircraft arrives. Perhaps the most important step is to make sure that all hospital helipad personnel are trained in the proper safety procedures. Once training is completed, you're ready to work as part of the helipad team. Always make sure that anyone on your hospital's helipad team, emergency department, security, and facilities staff have the required personal protective equipment. This includes hearing protection, eye protection, and a high visibility vest when there is vehicular traffic. These help keep you safe while you're working on the helipad. Now let's talk for a moment about Rotor Wash. Rotor Wash is the powerful blast of air that comes from the downward thrust of the helicopter blades. As an aircraft is landing or taking off, the rotor wash becomes so strong that it can pick up and propel loose objects around the helipad. Therefore, you should not wear baseball hats, scarves, or other loose clothing on the helipad. They're too easy to blow off in the wash of the rotors and are a real hazard to aircraft operations. Also, don't use personal electronic devices like your mobile phone or a computer tablet on or near the helipad. They can present a hazard to aircraft operations and may violate patient privacy laws. When you know an aircraft is on its way, clear the helipad and nearby areas of all non-essential people, equipment, bystanders, vehicles, and machinery. Carefully walk the helipad, scanning the ground, and remove any foreign objects. Again, the powerful wash of air from the helicopter blades can pick up small items and injure a team member or the aircraft. Carefully scan the air around the helipad as well, surveying the area for unmanned aircraft systems, sometimes called drones. Contact the pilot and the LifeLink Communication Center immediately if you see a drone near the helipad. Now, winter conditions present a unique challenge to helipad operations. The bottom line is that Surface slip hazards are a leading cause of helipad injuries, and you know how slippery ice and snow can be on hard cement. Therefore, your helipad operation should have a written plan to regularly inspect and remove snow and ice, taking into account that snow can blow and drift even after it's stopped coming down. The plan generally requires the coordination of the emergency department, security, and facilities personnel working together around the clock to carefully monitor the helipad and quickly address changes in the surface conditions. A word of caution. Standard rock salt ice melt is highly corrosive to aircraft. Therefore, only use aviation-approved snow and ice melt, and never, ever use sand. Please contact LifeLink 3 for more information about aviation-safe ice melt products. As part of the hospital helipad team, you should conduct a pre-use inspection and operational check of the hospital gurney prior to the aircraft's arrival. Make sure that everything is working properly, including the brakes and steering mechanism. Each gurney should have side rails and hard surface, free of damage and sharp edges. Also, double-check to make sure there aren't any pillows, sheets, or blankets on the gurney. They can become a hazard to aircraft operations if they get caught up in the rotor wash. Finally, physically locate and verify your emergency exit routes and fire extinguishers, and review your hospital emergency procedures. We'll talk about those emergency procedures later in this video. Earlier in this video, we discussed the hazards associated with the rotor wash, the powerful blast of wind created as the helicopter is landing or taking off. The following are some other dangers associated with helicopter operations. Obviously, you want to stay clear of the blades. Even when they appear to be spinning slowly, a rotor strike will cause serious injury or even death. Also, never approach the helicopter from the rear. There are similar safety issues concerning the tail rotor. It has its own rotor wash, and you could sustain serious or fatal injury if you were to inadvertently walk into it. The aircraft's engine poses two hazards: the noise it makes and the hot exhaust it emits. That's why eye and ear protective gear is always required. Now, LifeLink 3 patient transports use two types of unloading or loading techniques, either hot or cold. The LifeLink 3 crew on board the aircraft determines which technique to use based on several factors, including the patient's condition and the possibility of other inbound helicopters. Regardless of the situation, never approach the aircraft until directed by its crew. The most common type is the cold unload or load. It's considered cold because the aircraft is shut down and both rotors have stopped turning. During a cold offload, you wait until the blades have completely stopped and you're directed to approach the aircraft by its crew. Less common is the hot unload or load. In this situation, the aircraft engine remains running with rotors turning. It naturally increases the hazards you face on the helipad. So again, do not approach the aircraft until directed by the crew. Your hospital may have additional policies that dictate your role during hot unloading and loading. Check with your supervisor to review them. There are several other safety techniques to keep in mind as you prepare to unload or load a patient onto the aircraft. First, ensure that the gurney doesn't have an IV pull that extends above head level. It could inadvertently hit one of the rotor blades. Once the helicopter crew has directed you to approach the aircraft, always remember to walk, not run, toward the door, staying inside the area outlined in green. This is the helipad's safety zone and is there for your protection. Never open or close the aircraft door during normal operations. It requires special training and is the LifeLink 3 crew's responsibility. In fact, doing anything with the aircraft, unless directed by the crew, can result in damage to the helicopter or injury to yourself. If you have to go around the aircraft for some reason, go around the front of the craft. This will minimize your exposure to the tail rotor hazard. Remember, never go around the tail or under the tail boom. There are three vital things to remember when you're unloading or loading a patient. The first is to be at the helipad when the aircraft lands, with the correct number of hospital personnel. This is critical to safely unloading or loading a patient. Having too few helipad team members increases the risk to the patient. Having the right number of people ready to assist also minimizes the risk of lifting injuries, the number one hazard on a helipad, and reduces the potential for unintended movements that might hurt the patient. The second thing to remember is, don't rush. Rushing can result in pinched fingers or someone tripping and falling. Always remain calm and steady on the helipad. The third thing to remember is to follow the directions of the air crew. They're experienced and capable and know the safest ways to get the patient onto or off the gurney. Safe and successful lifting and transfer of the patient requires coordination, communication, and the use of safe lifting techniques. Follow the air crew's directions and ask questions before lifting. Remember too that the aircraft stretcher presents multiple pinch points, so always be careful of your handholds and finger locations. Also, take the time to check that all tubing and equipment is freed up from the helicopter before moving the patient. Remember too that it's easy to trip over the skids on the aircraft. They're definitely trip hazards. Always be aware of where you are in relation to the skids as you're moving a patient. Finally, if you see an unsafe situation, call STOP.
Stop!
Help resolve the issue, then proceed. That's your personal responsibility and the responsibility of every person involved with a patient transport. Now, in the unlikely event of an emergency, you need to know and follow your hospital's emergency action plan. Review this plan and procedures with your supervisor on a regular basis. If you've been trained and qualified by your hospital, make sure you're familiar with how to activate the fire suppression systems and/or fire extinguishers, and know the steps to activating the emergency management system for your hospital. Finally, ask your supervisor for hospital-specific policies that may dictate your actions during an emergency. But above all, ensure that you are personally safe before attempting to rescue or provide first aid to anyone else. Thank you for participating in today's Hospital Helipad Safety Training Program. Always remember, make sure your helipad is ready to receive aircraft by keeping it free of obstructions. Winter operations require constant effort to keep the helipad open and clear. Beware of rotor wash during landings and takeoffs, both top and tail rotors. In a cold unloading or loading, the blades stop turning. In a hot unloading or loading, the blades continue to spin. Regardless of the situation, don't approach the aircraft until directed by crew. Slip, lift, and trip hazards are your biggest risks of injury. And finally, know your hospital's emergency procedures, inside and out.
Hi, I'm Joe Hennessy, the Safety Manager at LifeLink 3. At LifeLink 3, our mission is safe and effective air medical transport, but we can't do it alone. We're dependent upon your assistance. I'm asking you to make a personal commitment to keeping yourself, the patient, and our crew safe by following the guidelines set forth in today's training video. Thank you.